Okay, and do that. Marvellous. Okay, so I think as it's 7 o'clock, I think I've got to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll do the election of chairman. So I'll read out a little bit of housekeeping first. So good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Folkestone Hythe District and Parish Council's Joint Committee. Please note that this meeting is being streamed live to the internet, and please could all members ensure their microphone is set to mute unless they are speaking to reduce any background noise. Members should use the raise hand button when they wish to speak. Okay, so that's the housekeeping done. Cool. And now we can move to the first item on the agenda, which is the election of a chairman. This time round, we're looking for a volunteer or nominations for a district councillor chair. So would anyone like to nominate or volunteer themselves for that?
I'll nominate Jenny.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Hobbs. Is that seconded by someone? Have a seconder?
I think Graham seconded. Graham.
Okay, lovely. Okay, then I'll hand over to you, Councillor Hollingsby, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, James, and thank you for the so good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting. And the first item or second item, I suppose, really, is any apologies. We seem a little bit low on the ground. Are there any apologies? None
that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest.
No.
Sorry, is somebody saying no? And item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Is it your wish that I sign these as a correct record, or we agree them as a correct record?
Yes.
All in favour? Thank you very much. And so we go on to item 5, which is fly tipping update. And I think Karen's going to do that for us. I don't know, probably with Andy as well. I don't know, but over to you, I think, Karen.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsby. It's good afternoon, everybody. I'm quite happy to sit here and talk to you about fly tipping and what it all means, what we do and how we investigate it. I won't go into too much detail, but I'm here then with Andy to answer any questions that you may have. So I wanted to explain to you the actual terminology for us actually looking at fly tipping is the unauthorised deposit of controlled waste without a licence. So as you're aware, that can be a multitude of things, from either a back of a van and dumping carpets or a bathroom furniture, and it could just be a bag of waste that's been left next to a bin. So there's a multitude of things that we would need to look at. We also look at things that are not on council land. So we investigate all fly tipping. So if it's something that is like a mattress and that's it, there's nothing that we can actually look at there that actually pinpoints who may have done it unless we've caught them on camera. But what we do is when there is a vast amount there, we will search everything. It will be numbers on boxes, it could be a letter, it could be all sorts of things that they've left behind, like a receipt, and we will follow that up with different companies or with kitchen companies. We could go to Argos and ask them who's purchased a TV recently with this reference number on it. There's lots of things that we do to actually try and ascertain who's done it. But as you can imagine, it's not a quick job. So it does take officers an awful lot of time to look at it. And what we will do is we'll look at patterns. So if there have been regular deposits in country lanes on certain parts of land that we know is happening, if we can, we will try and locate an area where we can put a camera up and signage to say that it's not allowed. And if it continues, we will hopefully gain evidence of what's actually happened on camera, and also with the evidence that we find within that deposit. We will then actually investigate it, and if we identify the person, we will then look at there's drilling going on outside, apologies if you can hear it. There is also, sorry, Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll then investigate it. If we identify the person, if it's their first offence, we will then issue them with a £300 fixed penalty. And if that's paid, then that's the end of the matter. But it will remain on our files for up to 5 years. And if it continues and we find them doing that again, we will then prosecute them. And we'll work with other local authorities as well. So if they've actually had a similar person that's actually done this type of thing in their area, we talk between ourselves and we identify what's happened. So we have had one recently that have actually lives in our area, but they've actually deposited in our area, Dover and up in Ashford. And they got prosecuted and a hefty fine was issued to them. So that's actually a really good outcome of some of the work that we do. The smaller side of the fly tipping is the small deposits. So whether they're bags left next to bins, whether it's just a carrier bag full. But I wanted to pass over to Andy to actually give some insight as to what his officers do to actually look into that. Andy, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Karen, and good evening, councillors. Hope you're all well. So I have 4 officers that I look after, who cover the 13 wards across the district, and each and every day they're out and about, obviously looking at various different things, and they do deal with larger fly tips and minor instances of fly tipping on a daily basis. And the first thing I'll do is I'll get the job sent through. If it's been reported by a member of public or by one of our protection officers, they'll go out to the scene and obviously carry out initial investigation, which is photographing and then obviously looking for things like evidence. Obviously they wear PPE whilst they're doing that, so they're obviously not contaminating anything. And if we obviously find a name or address, then that is followed up. One of the main things that we do come across is where the man in a van turns up at your house, you've probably seen it before, and says, "Oh, what are you doing with all that rubbish? I'll take it away for £20. And then people who are not aware will give them the bags, give them the £20, and then they'll just dump the rubbish. And unbeknownst to them, they've left stuff in the bags with their name on. And then, unfortunately, they're the person responsible, because each one of us are responsible for our own waste, and we're responsible for who we give it to. And if we do give it to somebody, then we need to obviously get a transfer note from them to say where they've collected it, where it's going to, and the name and address of the collector, etc. But that often doesn't happen, as you can imagine. We've also got a thing as well that can be used, which you won't see. It's called Smart Water, which the guys will have. So we've come across a fly tip. We've got like a little liquid bottle called Smart Water. You can spray it onto the fly tipping. It comes with a barcode, and then you just register it online. It takes seconds. And then if there's another fly tip, we can then start linking fly tips together using this Smart Water. And the people who are dumping won't know that because they obviously can't see it. You've got to use a special fluorescent tool to be able to see it, almost like what they use for CSI, isn't it, when they're looking for blood and stuff like that. So that's quite useful. The officers then will always link in with the protection officers, who are the investigatory leads for all fly tipping, because they're the ones with the more qualifications and experience. And for larger fly tips, we take pretty much careful care on those, because they can have big outcomes rather than a couple of bags by a bin. And the team have had multiple court appearances for people who've received larger fines, some smaller fines, some larger fines for fly tipping. And as Karen said, it stays on the record for 5 years as well. We do lots of PACE interviews with people, which is held in the Civic Centre in our designated interview room, which is good. What else do we do? And the fly tipping doesn't stop. It is pretty permanent all the time, all over the district. What we do is link in with all the different local authorities as well. We've got good working relationships. So if they've had something in Dover, we can hopefully link something to Folkestone, then on to Canterbury, etc. So we keep each other in the loop of what's going on. But if somebody does report fly tipping, a member of the public, what is helpful is if they see a vehicle, let's get in as many of those details as possible. If you just say there was a blue car dumping, fly tipping, it doesn't really have a lot to go on. And generally, the most what we work for is to have a member of the public who's willing to go to court. If somebody's not willing to go to court, who's witnessed something, then there's not a lot you can do, and it's quite difficult. But we also understand a lot of people don't want to go to court because they don't want to be, seen by any perpetrators or anything. So that's where it is really. So we've got lots of successes. We keep going every day. It's really beneficial. And the guys have got some great experience now working as a team throughout the council as well, different colleagues. And I think it's about it at the minute.
Just to jump in there, the criminal offence that they're actually doing, there is a burden of proof that's needed. And that's beyond reasonable doubt. So that's the same as somebody that's actually been tried for murder. So, it is a very high threshold where we can't just think that this was the person that did it. We have to be 100% category that they have done it. And the maximum penalty that can be given is up to £50,000 through magistrates court, 12 months imprisonment and an unlimited fine, or a 5-year imprisonment if that's done via the Crown Court. So the threshold is high. The reason why that we give a fixed penalty is that they're allowed to then have their liability discharged, which means that they haven't admitted or denied that they've done it, but they're prepared to make that payment. And after that, it means then that they know we are aware that they've done it, or we believe that they've done it, and they don't want to take it further to go to court, and it stops them from them having a criminal record. But that is only a one-time offer. It then means that we've recognised that we've caught somebody doing it, and it saves officer time having to prepare a court case and actually take it through the legal system. So that's the reason why we go through the fixed penalty process, and it should be sufficient to stop somebody from wanting to do that again, knowing that they have been caught and could have ended up being prosecuted. So I hope that gives you an insight as to what we do, but we're more than happy to take some questions from you.
Can I just add something in, Karen, quickly, if possible? Something I probably should have mentioned is we have a number of wildlife cameras so we don't just wait for members of the public to report fly tipping or give us evidence. We have any hotspot areas. We've got a number of cameras that are out as we speak around the district, and which are monitored all the time, and we get a lot of evidence from them CCTV wildlife cameras, as you can imagine. Of course, we do see some things we don't really want to see, but we do get lots of evidence from that. And obviously the use of things like CCTV from around Folkestone, all around the district. But these cameras are invaluable to the fight against fly tipping. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen and Andrew. I didn't know. I have to say, I didn't know about the sort of the marking so that you can actually tie up with other areas. That's really quite interesting. I wasn't aware of that. But thanks very much. I think that's covered quite a lot of the areas. And I think as two people, Councillor Mullard and then Councillor Hobbs with questions. So Councillor Mullard.
Thank you, Chairman. On a slightly related item, this very day I went down to the New Romney tip to get rid of some old trellises, some washing line, a bit of iron grills and an old television, various things. Now, the thing is, I've found it extremely difficult to actually get through to the site booking area. It was taking me all the way around Kent, and I didn't want to go all the way around Kent because it's KCC, of course, that control it. Eventually, I found there was a whole list, one of which was New Romney. Clicked onto that, book an appointment, then it all went off, and the second time I did it. I did book it, and I got there, no problem. Very helpful man there. It was very sunny at the time. Couple of staff members. There were two cars, me and one other car. I think the one in front of me hadn't actually booked from looking at the reaction of the staff member there. The point I'm getting at is that if I found it difficult, I know I'm an idiot, I know that, but if I found it difficult doing it on the web, and I have access to computer technology. If I found it difficult, then you can bet your life that other people find it equally difficult or more difficult, hence fly tipping. I like the old system where you went along there, turned up, all right, there's half a dozen or a dozen cars there, it doesn't matter, plenty of room in New Romney, tons of room in New Romney, 2 cars there today. It doesn't work. This booking system does not work. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Terry. And I have to say, on our behalf, the District Council, it is a KCC issue, as you pointed out, and KCC did a consultation on it, and it came out that people preferred the booking system. So I have to agree with you. But on the booking, it does come up with all the waste sites in Kent. But once you've got that idea, it's fairly straightforward. So I don't think any officer can respond to that.
I would like to, actually, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, Karen.
So this is actually very good for us in the sense that I actually responded to that consultation to say I didn't think it worked. And, you know, as Councillor Hollingsby said, that, you know, they've obviously decided that it does for them. However, the one thing we didn't pick up in this meeting is that we can identify people who are collecting small deposits of waste from people, taking it on the back of a trailer. They're now actually registering their details online, and they can be visiting of like 12 times in a week. And we can then get that information to be able to share as evidence that they are doing this type of work. So whilst it is actually incredibly frustrating, and I understand that, I feel that too, there is actually a benefit for us that we can actually prove that people are doing things that they shouldn't be. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Karen. I think Frank was next. Councillor Hobbs?
Mike was actually before me, Jenny.
Oh, was he? Sorry, I didn't. Sorry, Mike. Do apologise.
Yeah, it was just really to sort of put what's going on, really. We had a couple of instances where we had some fly tipping in Lim, and our litter picker reported it to the parish council. And then the next thing I saw was the enforcement officer going down my road to have a look at it. And sure enough, I jogged down and she took the details down, and they tracked it down to someone in Sheraton and prosecuted them. So it was just to say it does actually work. So that's good.
Thank
Something
you.
positive.
Thank you very much for
Appreciate
that.
that.
Yes. Right, your turn now, Frank.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it still the case that if there's fly tipping on private land, and that landowner is still responsible for the cost of removing it?
That's correct.
Which is why we very quickly get out there and push it onto the verge. Yes.
I mean, we can still investigate it, but the removal would be the landowner.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, if the landowner decides that they're going to push it onto the verge so it belongs to KCC or to us, then they also will get done for fly tipping because they've moved it onto somebody else's responsibility. So that has happened before, and we've had to deal with it in that manner. It does feel very cruel, but it is the rules.
Frank, I don't think you should have said that.
I haven't done it. We did have one instance some long time ago where a commercial dump took place, and we found names and addresses among the things. So that was then passed on to whoever was doing it in those days. But it's quite a while ago now.
Thank you.
Anything like that, if you see anything at all, or you know, any of the residents actually see anything, then please just get it reported through to us, and we will be straight on it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I was going to say exactly the same. I keep saying that at all the parish council meetings that I attend, and is that it's really important that people report the fly tipping. I know some people say, oh well, nothing happens, or it's not worth it, but I keep trying to explain to them about the pattern that it builds up.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a message really, that we just need to make sure that people do understand that reporting makes a difference. Okay, well,
and also it means that we get to see it so much quicker. The moment that, you know, the eyes and ears out there of people that see things and hear things that go on, the moment that we're aware, then we can then get out there. It might take a lot longer for Veolia or somebody else to come across it. So the quicker that we hear about it, the quicker we can investigate it.
Thank you very much. So
Graham's got his hand up, Jenny.
oh, Graham.
Jenny, can I just come in with a quick
Oh,
one?
of course.
Just referring to, we had a situation about 12 months ago where one of the neighbours of the hall put a settee outside for, it was quite a good settee, anybody that wanted. The kids moved it and put it on the land of the village hall. Now, the village hall then became the responsibility body to move it. I did report it to the district council. I never did hear anything if they investigated it.
Okay, so what I can say to you is that generally, if it's something like a mattress or a settee, there's nothing else that's with it, it's very unlikely that we can actually identify who's actually done it. If there is information that's been shared to say that you know who it was that actually put the chair out there and it's ended up on like somebody else's land, then we can deal with that and speak to that person. But that's why that's important to get that information. If it's not known who it is, then what will happen is that it will then literally just be registered to be collected and then it's removed because there's nothing that we can do about it. So that's the difficulty when it's an item of furniture, unfortunately.
Yeah, it was outside the person's house for several days. And we also caught on CCTV the people moving it onto the village hall site. And I did mention this to the officer I spoke to.
Mm. And what did they come back to you with?
They didn't come back.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe then if you want to share some of that information with myself and Andy, and then we can then find out exactly what happened to that and come back to you.
Well, it is past now, but that's the situation that arose on my instance. And the other point I made, do you work closely with the litter pickers that cover the Marsh?
There are links with them. So if we know that there are things that have actually been left in an area like fly tips, etc., whether that gets put through to the area officers or to us, then yes, we'll collect that information from them.
And do you supply the bags to them?
Council does, I think.
To be honest with you.
I think the council does, yes. Giles always used to do that.
Yeah.
Because I did hear a report from the litter pickers that you only allow a certain number of bags. Perhaps you could check that one out for us, please.
Yeah, we will.
Because they do a good job around the marsh, and they're always out on the roads.
Yes.
Sorry,
I think.
Sorry, go on.
It was some time ago. I do remember that we had an issue with insurance with them. So, and I don't know whether it was set then, but we will find out for you, Graham, and come back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. If you would, please.
No problem.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions for Karen or Andy? No. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and
thank you.
We'll let you go for the rest of the evening.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Right. Well, we're quite a small, but obviously a great group, aren't we? And I think, I'm assuming, Dave, that you're Julia, because we've got Julia down to.
I'm Julie. Yeah, she's in Russell, I think, tonight. So she could have done it online, but I'm covering. Yeah. Yeah.
Just welcome to Dave. You explain your title. I always forget the titles from the Otterpool Park project team.
Yeah. So just. Bit of background, I'm Dave Shaw, I'm planning manager at the Otterpool Park LLP, the company that's been set up to deliver the project as master developer. I've been employed directly by the company for about 2 or 3 months now. I think I was on secondment to the company from the council for about a year before that, but prior to that I was employed directly by the council for about 30 years, so been hanging around for some time really. Checking back through the minutes, I think it seemed that the last time this group had an update on Otterpool Park was probably about 3 years ago. I think it was March 2019. there's quite a lot to cover, I think, really, since then. So what I was intending to do really was to run through sort of the progress we've made, really, I think, and really focus on two things, I suppose. Although it's not an area that I'm directly responsible for, I thought it'd be worth just talking about the focus on the local plan and where that's gone, because I think that's a lot's happened on that front in the last 3 years, which is relevant to Otterpool Park. And then really just give you an update on the submission of the plan application that was recently updated a few months ago, and is sort of going through the consultation and consideration process really at present. So yeah, really just to start with the local plan situation, really. And I think just going back in time, you probably recall that the council adopted a local plan back in 2013, the core strategy, and that sought to sort of provide for the future needs of the district, and it allocated sites at Folkestone Seafront and Shorncliffe Garrison for around sort of about 1,000 units each. There were also broad locations development at Sellinge and New Romney. And the reason I mentioned that really was that was based on a housing target, really, objectively assessed need, which considered sort of household formation rates, which was looking really at delivering around 350 dwellings per year across the district. So really pitching at that sort of level. I think since the adoption of that plan in 2013, the sort of objectively assessed need and the housing requirements for the district have been thoroughly reassessed, really, and that figure's gone up to 738 dwellings per year, so quite a massive increase, really. And I say that really because that does provide, I think, a bit of the background to sort of, where Otterpool came from and the sort of justification, really, for the size and scale of the development. I mean, in putting the local plan together, the council did actually consider sort of a range of options, really. But I think the conclusion really was that the only really real location for strategic growth was really within the vicinity of the Otterpool Park site, and I suppose that coincided also with obviously the racecourse no longer being active and opportunities presented there, really. So yeah, I mean, I think if you think about the district as a whole, you have got quite a lot of constraints. So the Folkestone Hythe area, with the bringing forward of Shorncliffe Garrison and the seafront, there aren't really any main strategic sites now that can be allocated in the urban area. You've obviously got to the north of Otterpool Park, to the north of the racecourse, you've got the area of outstanding natural beauty, which also wraps around to the east and the south. So a sort of major constraint there going out into the North Downs. And a lot of the district is obviously, Romney Marsh, which is at sea level, and for other reasons, including so accessibility, is probably not suitable for strategic level development. So I think the conclusions of the work the council undertook was that Otterpool Park was the best location really for meeting that strategic need, really, in terms of future housing growth based on that objectively assessed need. So I think really sort of since the last meeting really of the group, when you had that presentation from Julia, there's been a number of things that have happened, really. The actual core strategy review document, which includes Otterpool Park, was submitted for examination in February 2020. So that was submitted to the Planning Inspectorate. And there was an examination in public, which was held with 2 planning inspectors during the sort of winter of 2020. And then sort of further sessions held in the summer of 2021. And that was quite a departure really from sort of normal practice, in the sense, obviously, that came sort of during the sort of lockdown period, or part of it. So it was actually all held online. It was virtual, which is quite a different way forward, really, I think, for those kinds of examinations. But it sort of went quite well, really. Following on from those examination sessions ending in summer of 2021, the inspectors actually published a series of modifications that they felt needed to be made to the plan to make it sound. And the council then carried out a sort of further consultation on those modifications in October 2021. Following that consultation, the planning inspectors then put together a report, really, and what that report does is to analyse firstly whether the plan's sound, and that's based on is it justified, is it effective, does it comply with national policy, has it been positively prepared? So they're the sort of tests, really. And secondly, issues around sort of legal compliance, so whether the process for putting the plan together was legally compliant. And the a conclusion the expecters was, yes, it met all those tests and could therefore be adopted by the council subject to those modifications. So the plan was actually adopted by full council on the 30th of March of this year. There was a 6-week period in which legal challenge could be made, judicial review, but that passed without any challenge being made. So effectively, to cut a long story short, what you now have is an adopted local plan for the district, which includes an allocation for Otterpool Park of the size and sort of general scale that we've included within the plan application. So there's a number of specific policies for Otterpool Park, policies SS6 to SS9, which cover the development. There's also other relevant policies as well within the plan that apply in some way, and also within the places and policies local plan, which is other local plan that the council has. But essentially, any planned application that's considered by the council for Otterpool Park will primarily be judged against those policies SS6 to SS9. And that's in accordance with the national legislation, really, which says schemes have to be considered in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. In terms of timing and scale of development, the plan sort of allocates sort of 5,600 new homes at Otterpool Park really up to 2036-37, but also recognises the potential for future growth up to so 8 to 10,000 homes. So it sort of takes into account the longer term really beyond the plan period, given the size and scale of development. So that's really where we are with the local plan. I just thought I'd mention that because I think it's highly relevant and it's something where there's been a lot of movement really over the last 2 or 3 years really in relation to Otterpool Park and other policies really. So just moving on then to the outline planning application. You may recall when Julia last spoke to you really, going back to early 2019, that a planning application at that point had just been submitted. So there was an original application submitted in February 2019. And really the process since then has been to update that, modify it. So we're now seeing a sort of resubmitted application which came in April 2022. So in terms of that application, there's an awful lot of material. I mean, it's a huge application given the size and scale, but it really can be categorised under sort of 3 areas really. The first are documents that have been submitted for actual approval, so things that are approved through the outline permission. And they include sort of a series of parameter plans firstly. And they're plans which set out sort of where development can take place, where it can't take place, the sort of height and scale and other key features that have to be retained really. So they really set the sort of key fixes for the scheme that are sort of almost non-negotiable really. And there's 3 of those really. There's one that sort of sets out the development areas where development can take place, and alongside that also shows the movement corridors. So the main movement corridors, the roads, the cycleways, the walkways, all those kinds of things, the key strategic routes. So that's all included on one parameter plan. The second parameter plan is related to open space and vegetation. And what that does is show areas of open space that have to be retained. So whatever scheme comes forward in the future, there's areas of open space that need to be retained. And that's consistent with the overall objective really for Otterpool Park, which is set out in the council's charter really, which is to try and have at least 50% of the site as open space. That parameter plan also does set out sort of areas for strategic structural and advanced planting, so where that needs to go to sort of lessen the impact of the scheme. And it also shows sort of vegetation that needs to be retained really as part of the scheme. So again, fixes certain areas of vegetation, certain trees, certain other features which really need to be retained. The third one is related to sort of building heights. So again, it looks across those development areas on the site and it sort of provides maximum heights to which development can go. There's 3 categories really, up to 12 metres high, up to 15 metres, and then up to 18 metres. And that's quite a crude assessment. There's lots of other things that determine exactly the size and scale and shape of development, but that they set the parameters for maximum heights really across the site. I think the second sort of major category really of information that was submitted was the environmental statement. And again, this is a very sort of detailed technical document really, which covers lots of different topics, be it sort of transport, heritage, green infrastructure, flood risk and drainage. And the real aim behind the environmental statement, as with any environmental impact assessment for any plan application, is really to identify the significant effects. So you take the scheme as submitted, you assess what the impact of that scheme will be. And from that, then you can start to then not only identify those effects, so those that making the decision know what those effects are, but also then set out the mitigation required to sort of lessen and reduce the effects as much as possible. So again, it's a huge document, but there is also, and it's a legal requirement, a non-technical summary which has been submitted with the environmental statement, which is sort of far more readable really, and does summarise everything that's in there really. And I suppose the third category of information really are a series of supporting strategies that have been submitted, which don't probably have the same status as the parameter plans, but they have to be taken into consideration, I think, when sort of putting detailed schemes together. And they include things like the transport strategy, the green infrastructure strategy, the heritage strategy, sort of a series of topic-based items really. And I suppose the other things just to mention as well, in terms of those, the list of documents that they're there for actual approval, are the development specification, which essentially sets out the maximum amounts of development that can be delivered on the site as part of the scheme. So that could be sort of housing numbers, floor space for retail, that kind of thing. And also, and this is new with this application, a series of strategic design principles which look at the site across a series of character areas and set out principles for design that have to be taken on board when any more detailed schemes come forward. And I'll explain the sort of approach we're taking in terms of different tiers in a second, really. But they're the sort of three main categories of information. But as I say, it's quite a weighty application. There's quite a lot of information being submitted. So just in terms of sort of general headlines, really, in terms of what's being applied for, it is a full outline application. So all matters reserved for future consideration. With any plan application, you can have certain things approved at this stage and others approved later down the line. But with this, everything is still to be approved in detail. And in terms of the headlines, really, I mean, we're looking at up to 8,500 sort of new homes across the site. The broader framework master plan allows for 10,000, but this is a part of that, so it's 8,500. There's 29,000 square metres of retail and related uses, including sort of food and beverage, and that's not just within the high street, that could be across the rest of the site in some of the local centres. There's 87,500 square metres of employment floor space as a sort of maximum, really. And that's designed to sort of support, 9,000 jobs really to sit alongside the 8,500 new homes. So to try and get that sort of balance. In terms of education, there's an overall figure of up to 67,000 square metres, but that translates into potentially up to 7 primary schools, possibly 2 secondary schools. I think that's all subject to, where we go in terms of population levels, population growth, but also really whether we go down the route of whether it's 2 form entry, 3 form entry could determine the precise number. So there's still some flex there really, but the application has put enough in there to allow the school provision to be put in place basically. 8,000 square metres of hotel floor space and then 8,500 square metres of leisure, and that includes both sports pavilion and the potential for indoor sports halls and other indoor leisure provision. So again, that's all in the mix as part of the what's been applied for. So I think the message really is it's not just about houses, it's about all the other things that sit alongside it, all the other things that support New Town being included within the application, so provision can be made really. The application also allows for the provision of infrastructure and utilities, including substations, network reinforcement and broadband. And as I've mentioned before, really a sort of major focus on green infrastructure with 50% of the site being open space. And that to some extent being fixed through those parameter plans. Also sort of, provision of blue infrastructure, as we call it. So, making use of the existing lake on site, but also potentially by providing new areas of water as features, possibly as part of the drainage of the site. So sustainable urban drainage linked to sort of new areas of wetland or water, what have you. So I think to sort of summarise on all of that, the sort of main changes really that probably have been made to the application since it was previously submitted. I say a lot of it has focused on dealing with the substantial amount of comments that were received in the last application. So it's been a question of trying to address those. But I think what we tried to introduce is a greater level of flexibility. I think the previous application was, you take the parameter plan that was put in at that point, it was quite rigid. So it showed schools in a particular location, it showed sort of local centres in a particular location. That was quite fixed. And I think it's accepting that this scheme will be delivered over probably a period of 20, 30 years. And at this point, you don't want to set everything in stone. There needs to be some flexibility to adapt to circumstance and to, deal with good ideas as they come up, really. There's also been some change to the red line, which predominantly includes these. They're now including Westonham Castle within the red line boundary for the application. And I think that's a result partly of, obviously the council acquiring the castle within that time frame. And it does, I think it's helpful because it starts to integrate the castle and the various improvements that can be made to both the castle and the barns, within that application area. And again, that's probably also a reflection of, the fact that the council acquired the racecourse. The original applicant was actually Cozumel Estates, the owner of the racecourse, but the council acquired the racecourse from them. So again, there has been a change of applicant also. So for this latest iteration, the applicant is no longer Cozumel Estates; it's actually the Otterpool Park LLP, so the council-owned company. So other issues, really, there is now more detailed housing strategy, which has been submitted with the application, which sets out essentially the mix of market homes, but really how the sort of 22% affordable housing requirement could be met, and what the mix within that 22% could be it, rental, shared ownership, and various other possibilities, really. So it provides a bit of a range and a bit of a mix to try and meet, I think, what is the council's objective, which is effectively 70% rental and then 30% shared ownership. So it's trying to respond to that. Something else worth mentioning, really, is the issue of sort of nutrient neutrality. This was a big issue that has arisen in the last 2 or 3 years, really. And this first came about, really, I think, in sort of South Hampshire and West Sussex, around sort of Chichester, Portsmouth, Havant, that sort of area. And it was on the back of a court case as well, which sort of firmed this up, really. And essentially, any sort of application now has to sort of demonstrate that it won't increase the amount of nutrients and phosphates going into the watercourse, where they would affect sort of designated sites, habitat sites, ecology sites. And I think the issue for Otterpool is it's really around Marsh, which is a National Nature Reserve, SSSI, various other designations to the north of Canterbury. And although it's some distance from the site, the reason it's relevant is that the Marsh site is served by the Stour River. And clearly we have the East Stour River going through Otterpool Park, that then sort of connects in at Ashford. It then goes sort of along the A28 up to Canterbury, and ultimately the runoff, be it foul water, surface water, from Otterpool Park does end up in the vicinity of Marsh. So that's something we have to take it on board, really. So what we have to demonstrate, really, is that the amount of nutrients, nitrates and phosphates, really, that are going into the watercourses, either through the discharge from foul water treatment or runoff from the site from surface water, do not exceed the current levels on site. And there's a couple of ways of doing that, really. And I think in some ways we're quite fortunate in that it is such a large site. It gives you opportunities and flexibility. So as far as foul water is concerned, there's a possibility of actually building a wastewater treatment works on site to deal with those issues, and that to base at sort of the western extent of the site. So that's one option, really, which is included within the application. The other issue will be then to provide reed beds, which effectively can filter out nitrates and phosphates, and so the discharge from the wastewater treatment works can go into those reed beds before it goes into the river, and likewise the surface water drainage, as part of the sustainable drainage, is sort of filtered through and discharged into those reed beds, and that takes a lot of those nitrates out. So I think that's something we've been able to tackle reasonably successfully. I think we've got support from Natural England on that, whereas a lot of schemes elsewhere that haven't got the opportunity to put something on site have struggled a bit. So I think that's been quite a major benefit for us, really, being able to do that. So other sort of changes, really, I suppose. I mean, I think the original application did have a probably what was a fairly traditional approach to sort of transport planning, in that it had a transport assessment, which was really based on the sort of predict and provide model, which was sort of trying to predict car growth, traffic growth in the future as it is at the moment, and provide for it. I think we tried to change that around a little bit to sort of look at more of a monitor and manage approach, really. And we've made sort of quite a commitment, really, to providing not only a network of cycle routes, walking routes on site, but also sort of linked to that series of mobility hubs. So there'll be sort of primary hubs in the town centre and probably at Western Hanger Station, and then sort of secondary hubs sort of within the neighbourhood centres around the schools, that sort of thing, and then community hubs within the main residential areas. And I think the aim behind those mobility hubs is to try and bring together all the different modes. So be it sort of public transport, sort of cycling, walking, shared transport such as shared cycle schemes, shared car schemes, all those kinds of things. So that's the sort of principle that's been set out at this moment in time, to try and sort of increase active travel, to try and reduce car usage. But you know, I think the key thing will be to monitor how that actually works out on the ground, and to sort of adapt the sort of mitigation as we go forward, really. So a more active approach rather than just trying to set things out as they are from day one, really. The other thing, as I've already mentioned, I think strategic design principles are now a key part of the application, and they're there really to provide reassurance on design quality and to sort of inform future stages really in the process. There's also a more comprehensive heritage strategy that's been put together, and also a code of construction practice, which sort of then should feed into more detailed construction management plans for different phases of the scheme. So just moving on, really, I mean, the other major change we've adopted, I think, is to look at sort of a three-stage approach really to this. Normally with any sort of planning application, you have an outline approval, and then you go straight to reserved matters, which is basically the detailed plan application. But looking around what's being done elsewhere, places like Oakleby Weald, I think, and Gilston, Harlow in Essex and Hertfordshire, they've adopted a slightly different approach, really. What they've done is put a phase in the middle, really. So rather than going straight from the outline to the detail, which could be, you know, from a permission for 8,500 homes down to, say, an application for, say, 50 homes or something, it's felt that's a step too far. So what we've done is tried to break the site up into sort of phases, really, and the commitment will be that at each phase there needs to be a master plan that's submitted for approval, also a design code, and also a delivery plan. So it provides that sort of missing link really between the outline application and the detailed design. So there's a bit of a hierarchy, really. So, you know, everything has to sort of follow. So the Tier 2 master plan design code, for example, has to be consistent with the outline plan application, and then the detailed applications that come in under reserved matters need to be consistent with the you know, the Tier 2 information, be it the design code or the master plan or the delivery plan. As I say, that's really where things like the strategic design principles come in. So the strategic design principles will then need to be reflected in something like the design code for a particular phase. We have done quite a lot of work around sort of phase 1, which is the area around sort of Western Hanger Station, the castle, that sort of area. So that's quite well advanced, but as the scheme progresses, there will need to be quite a number of these master plans, design codes pulled together for other areas of the site. That it's trying to embed that from day one as a principle, really. So those that Tier 2 information will effectively be submitted in the future as a sort of discharge of condition against the outline plan application, but will need itself to be subject to extensive consultation before it's considered by the council. I would have thought, you know, given the size and scale of some of those master plan areas, it will need to be, you know, subject to an awful lot of consultation. I think it's the message there, really. So just I'll just touch briefly then on the sort of what I think the sort of timescale is, really. So we submitted the application, I think, back in April this year, and there was an initial consultation which ran from end of April to the 24th of June. So it was an 8-week consultation. So quite a lot of information submitted, quite a lot of representations made as part of that. We did have a public exhibition on the 19th of May at Western Hanger Castle, which was quite well attended. I think about 150 people came along to that. I suppose from our perspective now, we're trying to sort of deal with the sort of scope of the consultation comments that have come in. We're working with the planning authority, having lots of discussions and negotiations with them around that, about how we respond and how we address what's been raised at this stage in the process. What we like to have, I think the first stage, the council they've employed a company called Temple to do a thorough review of the environmental statement. So it's quite a technical review, and that will require us to sort of prepare, as we've done really, a series of clarifications to the points that have been raised. And those clarifications will really need to be subject then to sort of consultation in its own right, really. And we're looking to submit that fairly soon, I think. So you could see a further consultation on the clarifications to the points raised in terms of the environmental statement, probably sometime during August. I think we're hoping to kick that off fairly quickly. Beyond that, again, we're dealing with all the other comments that have come in. There's some work we've been doing for some time around transport and the water cycle study, which will need to be resubmitted. So again, we're probably looking at another resubmission towards the end of August, and a further consultation, I would have thought, during September. So the aim really, I suppose, here is to sort of aim for, if it's possible, I mean, it's within the gift of the council, I suppose, to aim to sort of get the application in front of the planning committee sometime this year, hopefully November, something around that sort of timing, really. And in parallel to that, we are actually working on the Section 106 legal agreement, trying to sort of pull that together. Because once you've got a planning committee resolution, a planning permission can only be granted once that legal agreement's in place. So it's probably taken us into the new year, I would have thought, until an actual planning permission can be delivered. Assuming everything goes to plan from our perspective, really. So that's a sort of general timescale. I say it's not set in stone. It could be subject to change, but that's really what we're trying to work towards in terms of getting that outline permission. And once that outline permission is in place, from a planning perspective, you will then see, as I say, the tier 2 information being submitted. A whole range of planning conditions will then need to be discharged, and beyond that, there will need to be sort of reserved matters applications for all the various elements of the scheme. Which was submitted over many years, really, in many different forms. So I think that's a summary, I think, where we are. Any questions, really?
Thank you, Dave. That's have I got it? Yeah, thank you, Dave. That's very comprehensive summing up, I think, of I thought I knew quite a lot. I think there's things in there that you've told me. One you didn't actually mention health, but I know there's provision for health. But you've mentioned education, and I'm sure it's included in it. But because obviously health is really very important, and I'm very keen on. I
think it comes within that figure I mentioned for educated community facilities, really. But I think there's two sides to this, really. There's certainly the need for the scheme to sort of meet its own need, really. So initially there will need to be a new DP practice provided. There's quite a lot of discussions going around that at present. But what the site does do, I think it's up to about 11,000 square metres of health-related floor space could be provided within the what's been assessed to date. So that does give you, I suppose, it gives other health providers to come in and provide facilities on site at Otterpool, which not only just meet the needs of Otterpool, but we extend to the broader area as well. So that sort of choice and flexibility is sort of in there, really, I think, for future health provision to be provided at Otterpool to meet a broader need, really, not just Otterpool's.
Yeah, that's what I assume. I just wanted you to say it in that people understand that. Yeah, thank you very much. Now, I'm sure there will be some questions. Does anybody have any questions? Or Mike?
Yeah, some of the key infrastructure questions like water supply, electricity supply. Obviously, the initial build was going to be covered by the remaining float within the system. I think it said 350 for certain things, 1,500 for other things. Now, there's obviously, this is in the district for electricity and water. Now, obviously, there's quite a lot of building going on at Sellindge. So when those figures were come up with, that was 3 or 4, a couple of years ago. But obviously, since the 350 figures came up, there's probably been 200 houses built in the network. So does that mean there's now only 150 spare for the initial build? Or
well, I think if you take something like water supply, I mean, as things stand, it's been calculated that there is capacity for 1,500 homes. Then beyond that, there needs to be a new pipe, quite a long, I think it's about 11 kilometres or something, from Paddlesworth Reservoir to feed the site. And that's been really assessed, I suppose, through the Affinity Water Resources Management Plan, which I think takes you up to 2080 actually, but it does get sort of updated every 5 years. And I think what that should take into account is sort of future population growth. And the utility companies should also be taking into account sort of existing sort of local plan allocations and the like, really. So in the case of Sellinge, I mean, those sites that are coming forward for development, are included within the local plan framework that already exists. So I'm assuming they would have been taken on board, but it's something that needs to be checked every stage of the process, really.
I mean, our local residents are sort of concerned with the impact during the initial build. And obviously, you've got the traffic disruption. I don't think the sewage supply is too much of a problem because you can put in a package unit for that, so I get that. But I suppose it's almost seemed to be a slightly backward step, this latest application, because you've taken out the detailed phasing and you've switched to all the, say, trickier elements being put into phase 2 and 3. Some of the questions that we thought had been answered initially have now been kicked down the road almost to give you, just to quote you, flexibility, could be, possibility. I mean, all those are words that aren't will be, are they? So I suppose this is obviously isn't the place to discuss this. But I suppose that was our only disappointment, that it seemed that there was a slight backward step of the information we were given, and it's not really allayed fears about how we're going to be impacted upon during the very busy early stages of the development. Now, I know you had a construction. I've actually read most of the document. God knows how many pages that was. And I mean, it's all good stuff. Yeah. It seems to me some of the pressing questions weren't answered, and they're not going to be answered, and we don't know when they're going to be answered.
I suppose what's not really covered in the application at present, but will need to be sort of nailed down and secure really when, before planning permission is granted, is all the sort of final triggers and obligations that sit within the Section 106 agreement. I think that's where you have that sort of control mechanism really to say, only so many houses can be built for X amount of infrastructure is put in. I mean, there is a commitments register which has been submitted with the application, which does set out all the obligations in the application. But the job of work, I think, us working with the local planning authority through that sort of negotiation process is to try and tie down the infrastructure provision to the delivery of housing and other elements really. And that's job in hand really, I think.
I mean, if anybody wants to read the document, I would recommend that they read the commitments register, because that's probably the most interesting document. So I must admit we focused on that because obviously it's commitment we want really.
Well, I think it does. I think that was the aim of it really, because I don't think we included anything like that with the last application, but that was trying to look across the application as a whole, look what has to be delivered, what has to be secured. And that's really, I think, a very good starting point for then securing that into either through a planning condition, so it's controlled through a planning condition, or it's controlled through the Section 106 agreement, which then makes it sort of legally binding.
I mean, I think that the message from the district, from the parishes, is that we'll be scrutinising tiers 2 and 3 very closely, because I think that's when the major questions are going to be answered.
Yeah, I think so, and I think I mean that's. Look forward to discussing it with you. I think because it's that's when a lot of these questions can be answered then around what's going where, how it's going, and when really.
I mean, the other thing was obviously the detailed phasing was actually taken out of the document, as the document admits, doesn't it? So it's very difficult to know what's coming next, if you know what I mean. I know you got phase 1. Yeah. But everything else is suck it and see is basically as you admitted yourself, to the traffic.
I imagine there will be I imagine there will be probably a need to secure a phasing plan again through discharge condition. Now that might be flexible, that might be subject to change, but at some point, as part of the permission, there will be a need to sort of nail down the phasing, I think, and then work from there, really.
I mean, it's the infrastructure phasing again that we're particularly interested in: primary schools, local health care, things like that, roadworks, critical roadworks during the construction phase, things like that, really.
Yeah, I mean, certainly things like New and Green Junction, we've made a commitment to deliver that very early on. I think that'll be a requirement of the higher authority anyway. And certainly with the school, the first primary school, a lot of work's gone into that to try and get that in early. For a whole range of reasons, really. I think it helps to sort of build the local community from day one, really, if we can get that provision in place.
Oh, one small bugbear of me, there's 360,000 Section 106 agreement in KCC coffers for work on the New and Green.
Yeah, and then that can be applied to to whatever scheme we deliver.
We haven't forgotten.
That has been checked out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can just confirm that. The school is quite high on the agenda. Primary school is very high on the agenda. Any further questions? Terry, you're quiet tonight.
Good hand up. On mute.
No.
On mute, I think he's on mute.
Oh, right.
He has got his hand up. I don't know if he wants to speak. Do you want me to see if I can unmute him?
Oh, yes, thanks, Sue.
Right. I don't know why that keeps moving. Right.
We can hear you now, Terry.
Yeah, I don't know why it mutes itself. The obvious first question is there any idea at all, bearing in mind planning's got to go through, any idea when we might see a brick laid, the first brick?
I don't know about the first brick, but sort of first occupation of homes is sort of looking sort of towards the middle end of 24, I think.
As early as that.
But then working back from that, clearly there's infrastructure needs to be put in place to allow for that, really. So I think
could be as early as 24 for the first build then.
Yeah, I think. Well, that's certainly what we committed to as part of the local plan process. I think that kind of.
The other question you've covered, and Jenny covered as well, spoke about the importance of education and the provision of education. Of course, that's important. I would venture to suggest that medical provision is even more important, on the basis that everybody needs medical assistance at some time. Not everybody needs education. And I say that because primary school is going to be built, and the mentions of 7 eventually. Is there any idea of the profile of families coming in? And I say that because historically, people moving into the district from outside of the district, particularly from London, tend to be like I was, a retiree. And certainly I wouldn't have had any young kids at that time. So, the question is that hopefully from an education point of view and from a work point of view, I suppose, we would hope that not too big a percentage of occupants would be retirees. Now, you can't legislate that, of course, because there's still going to be a whole gaggle of retirees wanting to head down to the coast from London. I just wonder whether it's what comes first, the profile of people or the assumption that there will be a need for lots of primary education. It's a difficult question. It's just buzzing around in my head, that's all.
Yeah, I think there is. There is a sort of an indicative profile I think we pulled together, but it's based on the sort of an assessment of the types of homes that might be delivered. But as I say, because we haven't got the detail, it is provisional. But I think that the main thing with this scheme will be to sort of try and monitor things and manage things over time, really. So not to sort of try and fix everything now, but we need to react to circumstances. You know, if we do find then that the profile is different to what we were expecting, that you got either more young people, more older, you know, you can have to adapt, aren't you? And hopefully, again, that's where this flexibility comes back in, really, to try and adapt, really. But I think the monitoring of the scheme in general is going to be very important to sort of guide the next phases, really, given, you know, it's not like a normal application where you get your planning consent, it all gets built out in 3 or 4 years. This is for long term, really.
Yeah. Can I perhaps just add to that as well, in that obviously the affordable housing and the different tenures would be aimed at local people. I mean, that is the aim. And there are certain schemes that we could put in, have been talked about and discussed, is, you know, for key workers, for instance. There could be some kind of scheme for key workers. So there are all sorts of possibilities, Terry.
Okay, yeah.
Frank, sorry.
I'm happy. I said I'm happy.
Thank you, Terry. Frank's got his hand up, but he's muted.
All right.
That's it.
I'm not now.
You're not now.
And we were a little disappointed with the level of 22%, but presumably because you're going to be controlling the development, or the council is going to be controlling the development on its own land, etc., etc., they won't be under the what's the word, pressure from the builders to lower that figure even more. Obviously, the original thing was as many as possible, but as Jenny just said, be local houses and that sort of thing.
I think the I mean, the 22% figure is that's policy compliant, so that's what the local plan policy currently says. It has come down from 30%, and that's a sort of district-wide target. Yeah, and I think, you know, that, so back to the idea, this is a full outline application, that figure will be sort of secured through some sort of planned obligation, probably through the Section 106 agreement. You know, we haven't submitted, if we were looking to sort of have a lower figure, we would have had to submit a viability assessment to show that we couldn't deliver that much affordable housing. We haven't done that because, you know, we do feel that's more than possible, really, given, you know, there are infrastructure constraints. There's infrastructure that's got to be put in, but generally speaking, it's a greenfield site. Normally where you get into difficulties where you've got complex sort of brownfield sites and they can't deliver that level of affordable housing. But essentially, when you get to sort of reserve matters applications coming in from different developers, they're going to have to be consistent with that outline permission. You know, so we can control it through the overall outline permission, really, and certainly all the discussions we've had with house builders have been around meeting that policy requirement.
And that figure was actually, it was through an assessment, wasn't it? External assessment put forward for the core strategy review. Right. Yes. Anything else, Frank?
I'll just, well, basically, what's been said about education and that sort of thing. It's important to get the school there before you get too far, because I can think of an instance in Essex, for instance, where there was a 600 house development put in the middle of nowhere on a sugar beet factory site, where the school was promised but didn't get built until most of the houses were occupied, by which time the kids had overloaded all the local primary schools. And the same applies here, that you should be able to get it going so that they don't end up going to all the local primary schools.
But all I can tell you, Frank, is that a sort of a board has been set up already, and I'm actually on that board. So I will do everything I can to ensure that the school is top of the agenda, as well as health, of course.
Yeah. So
I mean, I think the idea has always been that there will be some kind. Oh, I've lost. Oh, what happened? Oh, I can't see anybody. I've lost it. But hold on just a sec. I think I must have touched something. Is that there will be some kind of primary school. I mean, it will not. It will. The space will be allocated, but there won't be probably a full-scale 2-form entry primary school to start with. But there will be a small school or whatever is required initially, and the same with the health service. And again, a number of conversations I know have taken place with the health service. I met the new head of the Integrated Care Board now, which has replaced the CCG just recently, and there was a presentation on Otterpool, so they're very well aware. And I also know that conversations have been had with local GP surgeries about perhaps a satellite welfare centre or GP centre to start with, but it probably won't be a GP surgery as a GP surgery. It will be a health centre. Right, any further questions for Dave? Well, okay, thank you very much, Dave, for that very comprehensive outline of Otterpool up to the current stage. We very much appreciate that. If there is no other business, there's no other items on the agenda, I thank you all very much for attending. Hope you enjoy the rest of this weather, or the rest of the evening anyway. I mean, I thought it was going to rain this afternoon. I was at Sellindge Primary School this afternoon at their end of their year 6 graduation, and I took my umbrella because it was going to be outside, but it didn't rain, so very hot.
Your fault it didn't rain, was it?
So anyway,